In Paris, 1944, women accused of helping German soldiers were punished in public. Their heads were shaved, and they were marched through the streets. Crowds watched as shame became their sentence. In Amsterdam, 1945, women accused of being close to German soldiers faced harsh punishment. Their hair was shaved, their bodies marked, and they were shown to the public as a warning of betrayal. In France, 1944, a young woman was accused of helping German soldiers. As punishment, French civilians shaved her head in front of a crowd. The public humiliation showed how betrayal was met with harsh and painful justice. In 1945, Canadian soldiers found starving prisoners in a camp near Weimar, Germany. This man, nothing but skin and bone, shows the horror of hunger. Liberation came too late for many who suffered behind barbed wire. A Polish prisoner of war stands at attention in Stutthof camp. His thin body and empty eyes tell the story of harsh treatment. Even while captured, he was forced to show discipline inside a place built on suffering and fear. In April 1945, a Russian survivor at Buchenwald camp points out a former SS guard. He was known for beating prisoners. The man who once had power now stands accused, while survivors demand justice for terrible crimes. At Neuengamme camp, prisoners were forced to do heavy labor for the Nazis. Thin and weak, they still had to work long hours. This photo shows how people were treated like tools, used until their bodies gave out. In 1938, prisoners at Sachsenhausen camp in Germany stood in striped uniforms, heads shaved, marked by numbers. This was before the war grew worse, showing how cruelty had already begun years earlier. In April 1945, at Bergen-Belsen camp, a starving man, reduced to skin and bone, tries to remove lice from his clothes. Even in such weakness, he fought against disease while surrounded by death all around him. At Bergen-Belsen, some prisoners were too weak to stand or even drink. This man struggles to lift a bowl of soup. The photo shows how close many were to death, even after the camp was freed. In Bergen-Belsen, women tried to cook food after liberation. With no wood to burn, they used boots from the dead as fuel. The pile of shoes in the background tells the story of life and death in the camp. After the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, prisoners rushed to get fresh water. For years they had lived with little food and dirty supplies. This moment shows the desperate fight for one of life's basics. After Bergen-Belsen was freed, German SS guards were made to carry the bodies of the dead into mass graves. Once feared, they now worked at gunpoint, facing the truth of the crimes they had served. In April 1945, soldiers wearing protective suits carried sick prisoners out of Bergen-Belsen. Disease filled the camp, so even the rescuers had to protect themselves while helping the weak escape the huts of death. A woman in Bergen-Belsen begged a medic to take her 2 sons to the hospital, but there were too many sick people, and many had to wait. Her desperate face shows the fear of losing family even after freedom came. After Bergen-Belsen was freed, women were given clean clothes and dusted with white powder to kill lice that spread typhus. Former prisoners, once nurses, helped with this work under the watch of army doctors. A British soldier named Louis Bonneguerre, captured in 1941, was found starving in Bergen-Belsen in 1945. Here, a fellow soldier speaks to him. His thin frame shows years of pain, but his survival is a quiet victory. Inside a hut at Bergen-Belsen, 3 women lay together, suffering from typhus. Their bodies, close to death, show the terrible spread of disease in the camp. Even after liberation, many would not survive the illness. After Bergen-Belsen was freed, British soldiers gave food to the survivors. Starving men and women lined up for their first real meal in years. For many, this simple act of kindness meant life after so much death. In Bergen-Belsen, women survivors received soap and towels from aid workers. These small items brought dignity back to people who had been denied even the most basic care while trapped in the camp. After being bathed and given clean clothes, survivors of Bergen-Belsen were placed onto trucks. The ride would take them to new homes where they could begin to heal, far from the horror they had endured. In May 1945, aid workers helped survivors find shoes that fit. This woman, Livia Kramer from Budapest, had walked barefoot for years. Her feet had changed shape, showing the long pain of life inside the camp. In Ebensee, Austria, prisoners stood in front of the camera in May 1945. Their bodies were so thin they looked like shadows of people. These survivors had faced hunger and forced labor until the camp was freed. In May 1945, survivors at Ebensee camp walked freely in the open square once used for roll call. Surrounded by mountains, the place of fear became a place of relief, as the prisoners were finally free men and women. At Ebensee, survivors lay in the camp infirmary. Many were too weak to walk, their thin bodies showing months of hunger. Nurses and aid workers cared for them, giving the first hope of healing after years of cruelty. Another room in the Ebensee infirmary held men and women near death. Packed closely together, they had survived the camp but were still fighting disease. For many, freedom came only days before their last breath. At Ebensee camp, survivors built a sign that read, "We welcome our liberators." After years of pain and hunger, they greeted the soldiers who freed them with words of hope, showing gratitude for the gift of freedom. Survivors of Ebensee gathered in the Appelplatz, once the square of fear where prisoners were forced to stand for hours. Now they stood freely, together at last, a symbol of life after years of cruelty. In Kyiv, captured German soldiers marched through the streets under Soviet guard. Once feared, they now walked in defeat. Crowds watched silently as the war had turned, and the conquerors became prisoners. In July 1944, Moscow staged the Great Waltz, a parade of 57,000 German prisoners of war. The endless columns showed the scale of Nazi defeat and sent a clear message of strength to the watching world. In Norway, prisoners of war gathered for a small meal, guarded by German soldiers. Many were forced laborers from Eastern Europe. Their thin faces and worn clothes show the hunger and misery they lived with. Survivors of Ebensee placed a wreath at a mass grave. It was a moment of grief and respect for the thousands who had died in the camp, a way to honor those who never saw freedom after so much suffering. In 1941, Russian prisoners were marched to German prison camps. Captured early in the war, many would face brutal conditions, hunger, and forced labor. Few of them would ever return home again. A wounded German prisoner is captured near Korenzig by US troops. His blank stare shows defeat. Once part of Hitler's army, he now stood powerless, a symbol of the war turning against Nazi Germany.